Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration.
If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restoretheglory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you. How you doing today?
Good, Jake. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Bob, we just finished a pretty special episode there with John Eldredge, and that was a great gift. One of the things that we wanted to shift into, and this, I think in some ways people might have gone, why is this series 100 and some episodes into the podcast where we're doing an entire series coming up here with therapists? So we know various people, we know all kinds of people from all over the world, really. And in this series, what we're going to do is we want to talk to people who are doing therapy on the front lines, people who are right there, and discuss with them how they're integrating their faith into their practice and things that they've learned, and then various methodologies that they use, et cetera. So I'm excited about where we're headed. Bob, any thoughts about just our hopes and intentions with the series?
Yeah, I don't think we planned it that John Eldredge, a Christian therapist, would be right before this series. So I think that worked out pretty nicely. And just I'm excited to see this unfold because we're both seeing this happening of more and more therapists recognizing the importance of the Holy Spirit in the office and how powerful it is when we move from psychology to encounter. And I think our guest today is going to be able to share that in ways that are going to be really encouraging.
I'm really excited. So, Bob, we have with us Bernhard Streiselberger. So, Bernhard is a good friend of mine. I met Bernhard, I don't know, several years ago now, and he lives in Steubenville, Ohio. So, let me read your bio, Bernhard, then you can say hello. So, I'm going to embarrass you with all this cool, fun facts about you. Bernhard is a native of Austria, and he graduated from the Sigmund Freud University of Vienna with a master's in psychotherapy in 2016. Professional counselor, specialized in Gestalt therapy and EMDR. And then in 2020, he moved to Steubenville, Ohio to continue his studies. Graduated from Franciscan with a master's in theology. He's been working with clients for over 12 years. He's lived in a cistern monastery, was formed as a Catholic monk. And in there, just learning about God's presence, learning to hear his voice. But more recently, he's immersed himself in the work of Dr. Conrad Bars, as well as the Immanuel approach of Dr. Carl Lehman, who's a former guest of ours. So these approaches, Bernhard has learned all kinds of things about exploring, expanding strengths, as well as life coaching, et cetera, emotional, human, spiritual development, and healing. So Bernhard, I'm really excited to have you on the episode. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It's really awesome. Bernhard, you and I have talked a lot. And just a fun little fact, you actually were a professor for my son, who is now wants to become a counselor. So that was pretty cool. So thank you for finding the sweet spot of not being too nice, but challenging him just enough to where that he could grow, because they don't know all the answers. So I thought you did a really good job with that. It was really sweet, Bernhard, because there were things that you were doing in the class, and Judah was coming to me and going, "Dad, oh my gosh, this is stuff we've talked about our whole life. It's amazing." And it was just really fun for me because his world's expanding into a world that I love. And Bernhard, you were a key player in that. So that's really cool. So Bernhard, tell us a little bit, why did you want to become a therapist?
Yeah, thank you so much for everything you just said, Jake. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's a joy, and it truly is a great joy and privilege to teach, and it's always awesome to make an impact. That's like making an impact. That was basically one of my main goals when I was discerning my own personal vocation as a teenager, even like when I turned 17, 18 years. I wanted to study something where I can go deeper with people. I was actually studying high school on a technical high school, like in Austria, we have, specific high schools that are orientated towards business or technology. And I did an high school for technology, automotive sciences and such. And I was actually, after that high school, not very much interested to continue as an engineer or something. And I wanted to do something more people-oriented. And then I joined the military. And during the military service, I really realized, because I was in Vienna and visiting different universities, I want to do psychotherapy science because I had that deep longing of understanding the human person deeper and also engaging on a deeper level with humans. I don't know if that was also at that state a personal desire to have deeper relationships, right? But yeah, that's how everything started.
So bring us from there. You then went and entered into university, which was an emphasis on psychotherapy as part of the university study? Or was it just general psychology at that point?
Yes. So in Austria, I studied at the Sigmund Freud University, and they studied, I was able to study psychotherapy science. On the one side, it was very scientific academic psychology study and counseling studies, but it also went along with a lot of practicums and practical. It was truly a counseling education. I graduated with a master in psychotherapy science, but at the same time, I was able to get licensed as a counselor in Austria. So it was actually a very long studies. It was about 5 years in theory, and then again, about 4 to 5 years in practice. I had to do a lot of internship supervisions. My whole studies, in psychotherapy science, was almost 9-10 years.
Wow. Was that a kind of a traditional psychoanalysis?
Good point, because it's the Sigmund Freud University,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I got some basics of Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis, but I specialized in Gestalt therapy.
Okay.
So I was studying a lot of Fritz Perls and Laura Perls and all these people.
If anybody has ever studied psychology, there is maybe one of the most epic videos of all time that you can find on YouTube where Fritz Perls, Bob, do you remember this? The Fritz Perls videos?
Yeah.
They're so, where he worked with Gloria and they did this early thing. And so Judah, my son, was Bernhard in class with you and was talking about the Gloria videos. And I was like, oh man, those are so classic. So most people who have a degree in psychotherapy have watched these videos and the comparison between the therapies and this early stuff. And Bernhard, it was really cool to hear Judah bring home how you guys broke all that down and what was actually Carl Rogers even doing? What was Fritz Perls actually doing? And then was it Albert Ellis? Was that the? Yeah, the other one. So listeners, if you just want an interesting, very early cut in what psychotherapy was, go type in that. But it has nothing to do with faith. It's just very early psychotherapy.
And if I could add, while you're looking up videos, there's one by Bob Newhart called Stop It.
That's not a very good psychotherapeutic technique. Okay, that's good, Bob. Yeah, check that one out. We do that one with our kids often, I think, is that technique or intervention. Yeah, Bob Newhart, Stop It. Yeah. So, okay, Bernhard, you've walked us up to a lot of training. And before I want to get more into all your formation and training, can we go to another channel of your life, which is your relationship with the Lord? So, I mean, monastic formation, was this all happening at the same time? And tell us just about that generically, and then I know they converge. So
yeah, good question. I had an aunt of mine. She's a religious sister close to Vienna, and I was actually very risky, or actually kind of my behavior, I don't know. It was a huge risk. Let's put it this way. It was a huge risk to actually start psychotherapy science, because in Austria, that was a private university and very expensive. And I didn't have much money. I had exactly the money for one semester. And my aunt, who is a religious sister, she allowed me to live at their cloister, at their convent, not with the sisters themselves, of course.
Yeah.
But they had an elderly nursing home attached to that convent, and I got a room in the midst of other elderly people. I mean, I had no money. That's where I lived for at least a year. I could stay for free, and my aunt and the other religious sisters, they were just very sweet and loving and kind. And that was actually the starting point of my personal reversion. I mean, I grew up in a Catholic, like, socialized environment, but I, with 17, 18 years, I almost left the Catholic Church. But then when I started studying psychotherapy science and living with my aunt, connected to the religious sisters, I started reading a book about Medjugorje. And a couple of years later, I went to Medjugorje, and then that's when the Catholic faith hit me and the Eucharist hit me. So Medjugorje was a huge conversion moment in my life. Yeah. And then, the years after that, I graduated and I was discerning priesthood or religious life. And the year I graduated with my psychotherapy science studies, I entered the monastery, a Cistercian Benedictine monastery in Heiligenkreuz, Austria. And lived for 4 years in the monastery. And I loved that prayer life. I loved living close to God. Yeah.
Bring us into that experience a little bit more. So in case nobody knows, were you entered into discern? Were you discerning the priesthood or discerning joining them? And
so when I, my first reversion or conversion period was very emotional, right? I was in love with the Lord and with the church, and I felt so home within the church. It was truly like a new horizon opening up for my life, and watching many videos, podcasts, and then people were like saying, every young man should at least discern if priesthood or religious life is for them. And I found a spiritual director and started discerning these questions. And I wanted to know, what is my vocation? What I'm here for, and where do I come from, why I'm here, and where I'm going, right? These very existential questions, they really bothered me very deeply, and I wanted to find answers, and I wanted to find, okay, so maybe religious life, priesthood, something for me, and I felt very drawn to that. And
So you just put all your training on hold for 4 years?
Yeah, good question. Actually, my abbot in the beginning, when I entered the first year of candidacy, my abbot wanted me to just continue so I don't lose my license, right? Because in the candidate year, it's just discerning if you actually really enter the novitiate, right? So it's very loose kind of in the candidacy. So the abbot allowed me to stay to even still see clients he basically allowed me to have my own psychotherapy office at that first year. Then during the novitiate year, of course, I didn't do anything other than living in the monastery, right? And then when I did my temporal vows, the abbot allowed me again to continue working as a counselor. And because it was truly needed, of course, I did not counsel my own brothers, but there were many people living around the monastery or coming from all places. And my spiritual father, Father Bernhard he is a very sought after, he has a huge name as a confessor. Like, people from all over Europe come to that place to see him. And he is also an exorcist, and he wanted me to be his closest assistant. So that work together in deliverance ministry and healing ministry from a psychological perspective was very fruitful, those 2 years in my temporal vows. Yeah. But many brothers really didn't like me being a counselor. That was also the reason why I was actually also leaving the monastery, because I was basically bullied out because they didn't like me being a counselor. Yeah.
Is there anything more that comes to mind? Like, that's just such a unique experience you have. I mean, Bernhard, if we just go back 9 years, like 9 years of formation just to get your master's degree, that alone is an interesting distinction between North America and the European models. So that's one thing. That usually can get a doctorate in that amount of time in the States. But then right after that, you go into a monastic formation and still able to see clients. And then within that, you start working in deliverance ministry. And is there more in that time, because that's a lot of time. You've had a lot of experience by now. Now you're working with a well-renowned confessor and collaborating with him. What were you seeing and experiencing already there? Because then you moved to Steubenville, and then we meet soon after that. What were you experiencing there in Austria, working with Father Bernhard in the deliverance ministry and the integration of psychology and deliverance ministry? Like, just what comes to mind there?
Very good question. Yes. I was just even receiving many prayers from my spiritual father himself. He was oftentimes also praying over me, right? And he's a very holy man. I was just very struck by how his prayers was impacting me, even like my psychological, emotional well-being. He oftentimes would pray, cutting off soul ties, for example. And what beautiful, huge impact that had on my personal, emotional well-being. That truly struck me. And also, like you read in the beginning on my short biography, that I'm also working with Sue Bars, and I'm very into the whole Conrad Bars teaching and living the affirming life. I can say my spiritual father, like Father Bernhard Wojcicki, he lives the affirming life. Like, he's such a warm, fatherly, loving, caring. His presence alone is affirming, right? Like, I'm struck by that. Like, having a human person who imitates Christ to the level of just sitting in his presence is affirming. Like, alone that fact was mind-boggling. Like, a person who is connected with Christ and reflecting Christ, living that affirming life, you feel emotionally, wow, he sees me, he sees my goodness, he sees my value, my worth, without even using words.
Yeah.
I think that is only possible with Christ. No counselor with just, listening skills or any other skills is able to have that effect.
Yeah. How beautiful that formation, in the sense of, so much of being a Christian therapist is bringing that presence into your relationships. And so to have had a spiritual father like that, where you could just experience not only his presence, Christ's presence through him, and the affirmation of your identity of who you are as a person, but also the training that you were getting as he's praying over you, and you're feeling the power of those prayers, and, learning the skills, like renouncing soul ties. It's one of the things we teach in our conferences too. And just this, what an amazing formation.
Yeah.
Bob, just real quick, Bob, I'm curious about you in this, and maybe I'll answer it as well, because it's making me think about the critical nature of the formation of the therapist, which often doesn't get a lot of attention. And even more interesting, have you ever asked any therapist you've ever worked with what their formation outside of psychotherapy was like? I'm trying to ask myself if I've ever asked that, which I don't think I have, but how valuable it is.
Yeah.
So Bob, can you think of people similar to Father Bernhard and Bernhard's life who were like that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can think of several different people at different times, including my dad at times and my mom, but spiritual directors like Monsignor Esseff, several spiritual directors, but that was one. And then God would send people in my formation, and some peers, but some mentors. One was a Pentecostal bishop from Africa, my friend Simeon, who I write about. And he had such a presence of the Lord, and he just loved with such a powerful love. And he was so gifted in healing, and that was a formation. And then there was another man that was a worldwide missionary who God just brought into my life, and I learned from him so much. So it's just like looking at all the different people that were part of that formation. And yeah, you don't really think about it at the time. It's just like looking back and you say, oh man, you were at work chiseling the hard places all the way through here to form who you called me to be. Not that that's over, but
yes. When I look back at my story, I can think of, when did the concept of becoming a psychotherapist even enter my story? And for me, a lot of it revolved around my own psychotherapy, my own reception of it. And so Bob, I think we've shared this at some point.
Yeah.
Bernhard, I'm not sure if you even know this about me, but I was working at a church in Denver, Colorado, Littleton, actually, outside of Denver, and started psychotherapy. And then in the midst of that, loved this whole world that I had really never known existed, which was working with people. And the people that I began to receive from, all of them integrated prayer and psychotherapy. It was what they did. So in some ways, I never knew any different until years later, actually, until I actually went into grad school, was the first kind of separations of psychotherapy and prayer and Christianity. And so, man, I can think of, she's deceased now, but Serafina Infuso. So just fun name. She was a Sicilian woman based out of California, who had a PhD. She introduced me to Gestalt therapy. She introduced me to EMDR. She introduced me to all kinds of prayer. And she was connected with Carl Lehman at the time when Carl Lehman was brand new and very early, but it was all group psychotherapy. And then outside of her, Tom McKay was my boss, who is now just outside of Atlanta, very into healing. Christopher West was a mentor, has now become a friend. Critical people who all, like Christopher West really said to me, Bernhard, I'm curious where this came into your world, where this integration, but Christopher West was the first person to say to me explicitly, Jesus Christ has the power to transform your life, really, actually, right now. It's not a theory. It's not something you have to wait to heaven for. You can actually experience transformation right now. Now, I was experiencing that with Serafina and the work that I was doing there, but Christopher just spelled it out plain. This is the power of the gospel, and it is available to you through various means, sacraments, but as well as psychotherapy. Bernhard, where did that happen for you, where that integration really came together and you realized that?
So for me, that happened in the field of prolife ministry. Like very early after my reversion, I was like introduced to the whole pro-life movement, and I was getting to know a lot of people. And I went to a pro-life conference in Vienna, a huge conference, Human Life International. And I met Teresa Burke at that conference. Like she is who started Rachel Vineyard and Grief to Grace.
Yeah.
Like those are worldwide spread retreats to heal the trauma of abortion, like Rachel's Vineyard, and also to heal from any kind of abuse, like sexual, spiritual, emotional, domestic abuse, the Grief to Grace 5 days retreat. And when I saw Teresa Burke at that conference and I was immediately interested. I want to get involved with Rachel's Vineyard. And then I went on a retreat for myself to be introduced to that kind of work. And then for years, I was a therapist on Rachel Vineyard's retreats in Austria.
Wow.
And that's why I saw how faith, like with living scripture, the way Teresa Burke is doing her retreats, how living scripture and psychology, wow, like I saw people heal from trauma through these retreats. I have never seen anywhere in my psychotherapy education. Like it just blew me away, like how counseling with the Lord works so much deeper, faster, more efficient.
Yeah. So Bernhard, so now walk us into, so you come to the States and you've had like a really profound formation experiences. Like it's really beautiful to hear it all concisely. You and I haven't even, Bernhard, I haven't heard it all in one take, which is just really cool to hear all that. So you come to Steubenville to get a master's in theology. So you want to go back for more formation. You're a glutton for punishment and to get more degrees. But and everything I know you're a committed man for what is good, and you will go through what's required. I mean, a hobby you and I now are in, and I joke that I got you into it is jujitsu. And jujitsu is not for the faint of heart. Like if it is not necessarily fun all the time, but once you get through the pain of it, it's incredible. So it makes sense to me why you would be into jujitsu. That's a whole other conversation. But so you come to Steubenville and you go and get your master's, but you went through a licensing dilemma and stuff like that, right? Like, tell us about that and then walk us into your practice now and what it looks like.
Yeah. So, I mean, my whole transition from the monastery to America was literally a miracle. Like, after that, like crazy bullying that I experienced myself in the monastery, I discerned I have to leave. And I left the monastery on 31st of August, 2020. And one day prior to that, I had a very beautiful Skype call with a couple friends of mine, and they saw what was happening in the monastery. They knew the monastery and some priests and religious there. And they also got to know me very well. And then they said, hey, Brother Linus, that was my religious name, we don't want you to lose your vocation discernment. We don't want you to lose your theology studies. And then they basically offered me, hey, do you want to go to Steubenville? We finance your master degree in theology.
Wow.
And that really happened. Like, they paid for my entire master in theology. And not only that, within 1 week after that offer, I got admission at Franciscan University. Within another week, I got a student visa for America, which is truly miraculous. You don't get a visa for America within a week. In the year of COVID, that was where everything was locked down.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like it, and like the first lockdown in Austria was over, and then in Austria they started a second lockdown. But exactly in that transition time, basically, I left the country.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you get out of the country?
It was unbelievable. Like, that was truly a miraculous, like, unbelievable life transition. And I arrived in Steubenville on August 18th. So my whole transition out of the monastery into America was 18 days. And the classes started next Monday after I arrived.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
So, and in the first 2 years in America, I still kept the private religious vow because I was still discerning, Lord, because I promised the Lord in the monastery 3 years of religious vow, right? Temporal. And I left after 2. So I wanted to fulfill my promise to the Lord. So that's why I did a private religious vow. And then with my spiritual father, I extended it for another year because I wanted to discern maybe the Lord opens up doors for me to enter another religious community or seminary in America. I went on different retreats, Ignatian retreat, and became very clear to me that the Lord doesn't have that path for me anymore. The doors were very shut down, closed. And I did not renew my private religious vow. And then 2-3 months later, I met my wife. And we got married. Yeah. We got married last year in April. And she was the one who introduced me to your Restore the Glory podcast. Anna actually showed me that podcast with Carl Lehman in September 2023. And that podcast with Carl Lehman that you guys did truly blew my mind. I was like, whoa. Because I did EMDR training. I'm trained in EMDR, and Carl Lehman was talking about how his Immanuel approach is effective on the level of EMDR and even more because he restores your relationship with the Lord. And I immediately got on his website. I learned, I got to know a facilitator, Immanuel approach facilitator. I wanted to experience myself. And I'm still seeing Immanuel approach I still see once a month an Immanuel approach facilitator for my own growth and healing, because it's just so beautiful to walk with the Lord and to perceive him so tangibly, right?
Yeah.
And then I wanted to learn it myself. Immediately I did the Immanuel approach basic training. And since then, this became my number one approach with my own clients. It's just so good. I don't know if that answers your question, Jake.
I love it. It's perfect. I remember you and I didn't know each other very well, but we're in Steubenville, and you started talking about Immanuel approach a little bit, and I was like, you meet people who are interested in the podcast, and it's great. But I could tell you were beyond interested. You were very interested, and you had psychotherapy training and background, and so that really piqued my interest, and then we began to talk more. So before we get into maybe exactly what goes on with your practice, Bernhard, you've done this whole other thing, and we mentioned it earlier in your bio, but I just admire the integration, which is a big thing for Bob and I and what we try to do on the podcast, with the whole formation and training with Conrad Bars. So you got to know Suzanne Bars, is that right? And tell us about that angle And then we can start about how all this stuff has come together for you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, that's another chapter of my life. Before I entered the monastery, I worked with a Christian psychiatrist in Austria, and he introduced me as a supervisor to Sandy McKay. Sandy McKay is one of the founding figures of the Catholic Psychotherapy Association here in America.
Mm.
And she was my supervisor for, I don't know, I think at least 7-8 years.
Wow.
When I was already in Austria during the time of my monastery time, and even before, Sandy walked with me all these years as a supervisor. And she basically taught me the whole field of counseling from a Catholic perspective, which was a huge gift. And then when I came over to America, I visited Sandy McKay, of course, and she told me, you also have to visit Bars.
Wow.
And she was the first one who introduced me to the whole Conrad Bars teaching. And then I also drove to Bars. I visited her in Texas, in Irving. And then when I was looking for a job after I graduated at Franciscan, I asked Bars if she needs anybody. I would love to learn more. I would love to work in that field. And I'm now her psychological, theological assistant. I'm helping her, like getting a couple of programs off the ground and book studies and such. Yeah.
Wow. Tell us more about what you learned there, because maybe not everybody might know who Conrad Bars is in our audience, and maybe give us a little introduction to who he is, and then his daughter Sue. Like, what is that all about?
Yeah, so Conrad Bars is a Catholic. He was a Catholic psychiatrist from the Netherlands. And he would have given up his career as a psychiatrist because he felt he can't really help people with medicine and psychiatry itself. So then he met Dr. Terwooer, who was also a Catholic psychiatrist in the Netherlands. And Dr. Anna Terwooer, she started researching on St. Thomas Aquinas' anthropology connecting with psychology, kind of. So Anna Terwooer and Conrad Bars started building a whole psychology on St. Thomas Aquinas' anthropology, understanding the emotions, understanding the human person, right? And this is just, I think this is really gold. This is so beautiful. It really understands the emotional life. They just nailed it. Like Aquinas nailed it, and then Conrad Bars nailed it. And so he is famous for, I would say, two main teachings. Like the first one is he developed what he calls emotional deprivation disorder. And then the second one, I think, would be living the affirming life. And with living the affirming life, it's not just meant by motivational phrases where you encourage somebody. It's really being mature in your own emotional life and being able to mirror to another person their own goodness. Like your presence alone, what I explained earlier, my spiritual father, his presence alone was so affirming and life-giving. That is basically meant by living the affirming life. Not so much by encouraging words or motivational phrases, which also can be very affirming, but living the affirming life is so much deeper because your presence alone reflects the goodness of the other person and basically heals the emotional deprivation that we may not have received fully from our own parents or caregivers. And that's why we are deprived emotionally, and our emotions did not have the space to mature fully, but it can be basically healed through other people who are present to us and affirming our deepest values and our deepest value. Yeah.
Let's draw into that deeper, because what I'm hearing is the connection between the being an affirming person and healing the emotional deprivation. And I'm thinking of security, maturity, purity as you're describing that, one of the things we talk about. So make that connection. It may be obvious to some, but just make that connection between the presence of that kind of love that's affirming the goodness of another and how that heals emotional deprivation. And then how does that apply in your practice?
Yeah, so Conrad Bars also talks about we all are not just born physically. we basically need to also experience a psychic birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he says if our parents, are lovingly present to us and affirm our own goodness, the person experiences what Conrad Bars would call a psychic birth.
Mm.
And like we start to see our own goodness, our own value, our own dignity in the end. And how that connects so beautiful with the counseling or coaching work that I do, particularly with the Immanuel approach, right? Because if you start sensing the Lord's presence, there is truly no other more affirming presence in this universe than the Lord's. Like, if I get my clients to just perceive the Lord's presence, and they may experience that affirming, tender care, love, friendship presence of the Lord, they may experience that psychic birth if they haven't already earlier in their life.
I think some people might hear that and they go, psychic birth, what the hell? And this, they're like, this sounds weird and new agey. But as you were saying it, I think this is something that we have to be careful with. And I mean, full of care, whereby truths can be twisted in all kinds of ways. But if you're not careful, you can be afraid of a truth that Jesus explains explicitly, unless you're born again of water and the Spirit, which, he's talking about baptism, but there's a principle that he's speaking to, which is there's physical birth that occurs. And if you understand what birth is, it's coming into new life. It's coming into another, like if you go from the womb to outside the womb, no kid in the womb is like, I think I have a pretty good sense of what it's like out there. It's going to be like whatever. They don't have a clue of the transformation that occurs from in womb life to out of womb life. And so that analogy becomes really beautiful for the transformation that occurs from being outside of God life and inside of God life, outside of kingdom life and inside of kingdom life. And there's a layer of that whereby in baptism, yes, sin is removed. You become a son or daughter of God, but there's domains and parts of the soul that can remain unconverted. Baptism doesn't immediately make you a saint. And so one of the primary things in that, and you see this with people who are neophytes and become baptized at the Easter Vigil as adults, they don't instantly turn into Mother Teresa or instantly become, John of the Cross. So they receive baptism, which transforms them, but there is other dynamics that are, quote unquote, yet to be born in them, which come through deep and intimate, regular encounter with the Lord. That is the process of holiness. So just this phrase, psychic birth, is actually very true, even though the concept might sound hokey or weird. Bob, anything else you'd say there, Bob?
Yeah, I even though we talk about the soul and the spirit being connected, baptism is a spiritual rebirth, but it's not necessarily the rebirth of the places of our soul that haven't been awakened. I mean, it is, but it's, as you're describing, what the psychic, psyche is psyche's soul, right? And the birth of the soul has to do with coming into the fullness of life of who we are, and we can have the Holy Spirit living within us, but places of our soul that have not been called into life or been damaged in such a way. And I think of so many addictions that are related to that. I think of so many gender distortions and same-sex attractions. Is at the base of it, as I've walked with people in those ways, at the base of it is this place where there hasn't been an affirmation of the goodness of the person in a way that the person can thrive and come alive in who they are. And so as I hear that term, I go to all these situations where we all need it at a deeper and deeper level. But I think in terms of a lot of trauma, the root of that is this emotional deprivation.
Yeah.
Bernhard, what comes up for you just as we're circling around this?
Absolutely. So, I mean, psychic, I understand, many New Age circles or the occult even uses that word, but Conrad Bars doesn't understand the word at all in that context, right? With psychic, he basically means psychologically, right? Like, and St. Thomas Aquinas, he talks about grace built on nature, right?
Yes.
And a little baby, if it is not loved well, will die, right? If a little baby is not nurtured well, even emotionally with tender care and grace builds on nature, and our nature needs to grow. Jesus invites us to living life to the fullest, but that means we have to kind of grow, mature emotionally, physically, spiritually. There is a path we need to walk. Mm-hmm. And that's what I have on my website. If holiness is the goal, growth and healing is the path. Like, we live in a fallen world, and our entire life is actually, from the perspective of Christians and Catholics, we actually need to grow and heal continuously if we want to become holy in this fallen world. Mm. And yeah, so, and I think that's why we need to nurture our bodies to be healthy. We need to nurture our souls and emotions. And I think we live in a society that is very emotionally dismissive. And sometimes, I mean, there are two extremes, either being voluntaristic, hostile towards the emotions, or the complete other extreme that everything like you feel goes, just run with it, right? And I think Conrad Bars beautifully explains the middle ground, that yes, your emotions are valid and they are not yet sinful. That even the Catechism teaches that in 1767, I think, that our passions in themselves are neither morally good nor evil. And even in our Catholic Church, we oftentimes get the idea that anger or hatred, whenever I feel that, I have already sinned, right? Yeah. But those feelings by themselves are not yet sinful, because sin is in the act of the will. And to distinguish that, and that our emotions want to be guided and guarded by reason and will, and that's the middle ground, right? First, I need to accept and be affirmed, and love myself and accept myself the way God created me. And then I govern and guide everything with reason and will, the way the Lord, like according to moral law, according to natural law, and so forth.
So, Bernhard, there's so much I'm avoiding going into, because there's so much good there. And listeners, I would just encourage you to go read Healing the Unaffirmed. Isn't that the title of the book? Mm-hmm. Healing the Unaffirmed, and then Conrad Bars.
Healing and Feeling Your Emotions. That's a good one too.
Yeah, by Conrad Bars. Those are just great resources to read exactly what Conrad Bars says. I mean, a lot of us in psychotherapy owe a debt of gratitude to him for all of the difficult work. Bob, I think it's something that a lot of people owe you as well. It is really hard work to do the integration of theology, philosophy, anthropology, and psychology. It doesn't just magically occur. It is not easy stuff, but when it's integrated well, it is transformative. It is the most potent response of love to brokenness, sin, wounds, etc. So one of the ways, Bernhard, that you have done this integration is by bringing in the Immanuel approach into your practice. So tell us a little bit, maybe remind listeners, in case they haven't heard that episode with Carl Lehman, like, what is it and how do you use it in your practice?
Yeah, so Carl Lehman basically unites the simple biblical truth, Immanuel, God is always with us, and that God cares for us, and that he wants to actually connect with us more than we want, right? That's kind of like the biblical truth. And then he combines it with a couple brain science principles that help us perceive the Lord's presence. A couple brain science principles, maybe the first one is that our brain is created for relationships, and a big chunk of our right hemisphere in our brain, Carl Lehman calls that the hardware for running relationships, the relational circuits. And when these relational circuits are active and online through positive memories, you can get these relational circuits active and online. And that's the best way. Like when you're deeply satisfied, connected with positive memories, that's the best moment of inviting the Lord to join you there. And the average person truly can, after you have fleshed out a positive memory, can truly, in some sense, perceive the Lord's presence. And then the Lord takes over and becomes the main counselor, the main coach, the main spiritual director. You basically help the client to establish a two-way back and forth conversation with the Lord. And then you can do just, I don't know, intercessory prayer. You can just talk to the Lord. You can just relax in his presence and take refuge in him. Or you can do healing work, emotional healing work. You can talk with the Lord about past trauma or things that were irritating to you. And Lord, please show up in these memories as well and heal me, basically.
Mm.
That's in a nutshell, kind of.
Yeah, great summary of that. So bring us into a session, all right? You're meeting with somebody, kind of bring us along of how you start and then how you move into that.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, we start with a prayer, right? I'm praying like, as usual, I do with all of my clients, that I start with a prayer. And then while I am praying, I invite my client to ask the Holy Spirit to help them find a positive memory. And then after the prayer, they share with me the positive memory, and I may ask a couple questions to just go deeper and stir up appreciation. And then I invite them to say a short prayer of thanksgiving, because gratitude gets our relational circuits even more online. And then when they're there in that beautiful, even that positive psychology exercise is already extremely valuable, right? I'm going into positive memory and just diving deep. So, and then I ask my clients, just say a prayer like, Lord, Lord, I know you are always with me. Please reveal to me, where were you in that positive memory? And then usually the client gets some sense of the Lord's presence. Some clients have a very vivid personal experience of the Lord, like in his human nature, kind of like as a human person. Some clients have more the presence of the Spirit or light, and then I usually invite my clients for a minute to just enjoy his presence. Just show how that makes you, just reveal to me, maybe share with me, how does that make you feel? Or maybe we go in a minute or two in silence and just enjoy the Lord's presence. And then as soon as you're ready, start talking to him. Or as soon as you feel the Lord says something to you, just speak it out loud. Because that's another brain science principle. Through speaking out loud, whatever comes into your awareness, when we process it through our language area in our brain, we benefit from how our brain works the best in community. And subtle content of the Lord's words or manifestations start to make sense by speaking it out loud in community. And that's how you establish a two-way back and forth conversation with the Lord. And then my clients start sharing with them whatever their struggles are, whatever is on their heart and mind. And the Lord continues to surprise me with answers that are simply very simple, but deeply profound. Like, I could have Lord, that's the answer. So profound, so simple. I could have why can I not think about that? I don't know.
That's so good. Bernhard, I love how just in your description of it, I mean, it echoes your story, Bernhard, which is so beautiful. And I can see why the gift of Carl Lehman and all his work has blessed you. It's just, it matches you so deeply from all the integration work you have done in your own formation. And then you're in the session and, the beautiful, I mean, it's so subtle, but when you understand human nature, and then basic tools of how to work with human nature, Jesus is honored and blessed. It's so simple in some ways, because if you put a plant in the sun and you give it water and air, it grows. And it's not complex. But we have lost over millennia, particularly I would say in our more current era, some of the most basic things that human beings need to thrive. And there's a reason neuroscience is so popular and cool these days. It's like everybody wants to know what the brain does. But it's even cooler when you know how to work with your human nature so as to enhance relationship with the living and true God. It's so good. Like, just Bernhard, what you're saying there, what it does neurologically, spiritually, psychologically, to speak something out loud that is true, because it brings it into community. And right there, you have the Trinity. You have the Logos. It's so good. It's so beautiful. It's so powerful. Bob, what's coming up for you here, just in reflection?
Several things. One is it strikes up desire in my heart. It's just like, I want more of that, right? That's one. Secondly, it sounds so simple that it's hard for people to understand how powerful it is. Like, how can that possibly, somebody's coming for therapy. They got these deep issues, like all the work you did with Grief to Grace and Teresa Berg's ministry with abortion. And, that's real deep trauma work, but this is really deep trauma work. And so talk a little bit about the transformation that happens in those moments. And, I think we've all experienced just the surprise of how the Lord meets a person there. But how does that bring transformation in the things that they're coming to therapy for?
Yeah, I could share an example of one of my clients that I'm personally deeply moved by. She had a very tragic family background. Like, her family was very abusive emotionally. There was domestic violence in her upbringing. And later, as a teenager, she developed an eating disorder and a lot of fear and anxiety. And now she is at an age where she thinks about retiring from her job. And she came to me mainly because she was suffering with a lot of anxiety and depression and social issues, like she had difficulties connecting with others. And immediately I asked her, you want to try the Immanuel approach? And she's so beautifully connected with the Lord. And we went through all kinds of different memories from her past childhood. And then I invited her to come to Steubenville for an intensive retreat, like 5 days doing the Immanuel approach 2 to 3 times a day. And I truly saw her, like, it was very intense kind of, but at the same time also very consoling, because if you encounter the Lord so many times a day on such a deep level. And there was one moment during that retreat that I felt like the Lord, like with one of, like, example, emotional deprivation, the Lord truly entered a memory where she has been felt so dismissed and neglected by her parents, and then later on in school by a teacher and so forth. And the Lord came in these memories where she felt so neglected, where she was neglected. And the Lord lifted that up and allowed also the anger, that the hard emotions of anger come through, and even emotions of hatred come through. And she was able to express all of that to the Lord. And that was a breakthrough moment, because the Lord received all of that without judgment at all and walked with her through these memories. And she felt so relieved. She also had chronic pain issues in her back. After that session, the pain was gone.
Wow.
Like, it blew me away. And even now, 6 months after that retreat, that chronic pain disappeared. Like, the Lord literally healed her from that. And not only that, like, after that retreat, and I worked with her 6 months. I mean, can you imagine doing 6 months work with the Immanuel approach compared to doing 6 months work as a secular counselor? With my secular counseling, listening, and therapeutic skills, I would have never, like, been able to reach a client who has suffered such a crazy domestic abuse and difficulties in her life, to basically heal all the sadness, all the anxiety, even physical pain issues within 6 months. Like, never, ever.
Yeah.
This just blows me away. Like, and I see these kind of transforming moments in my daily practice. Like, I feel like I became more like a witness than a counselor or coach to my clients, right? Like, okay, Lord, I lean back, you do everything, kind of like.
Oh, it's so good. It's so true. Bernhard, tell us a little bit about what happens when people find it difficult to have that initial connection with the Lord. So I understand the protocol. I know I'll let you answer. I know I have my own experiences with this, but what happens when people struggle in that initial thing to turn on the relational circuits because it's just so shut down? Like, what do you do in those spaces? How's that work?
Yeah, there are a couple things. Sometimes people have troubles connecting with the Lord because he's a man. And maybe people have been traumatized by a man, right? By, like, masculine men. And like one thing that I love to do is either ask the Holy Spirit, like sometimes if it doesn't work with Jesus, all of a sudden it works with the Holy Spirit. And if that also doesn't work, I had one client I asked, that's actually a Catholic add-on to the Immanuel approach. I asked Mother Mary.
Uh-huh.
I had one client who he is kind of like a soldier. Yeah, he is a soldier. He serves the military. You know, the strong, masculine. Like he really appears very strong and masculine, right? A little bit intimidating, a little bit even. And then he, all of a sudden, like with the Lord, it was hard to perceive him, but all of a sudden he was able to perceive Our Lady. And like I saw this strong soldier in front of me starting to weep and cry, like, what's happening now, right? I mean, he himself said, what just happened, right? I mean, like that's like that's what I like to do. Either I go to the Holy Spirit or to go to Our Lady, or maybe you can try saints or guardian angels or angels. If all of that doesn't work, I had one client where it was even hard to find a positive memory, right? There was so much neglect and so much isolation in her life. It was even hard to find even positive memories. And what I do with her, that's where I have to maybe do a little bit more like my counseling work, where I try to work a lot with resources, right? I try to enhance all kinds of resources. With EMDR, there are a lot of techniques how you can even use the slightest gratitude that you experienced at some point to enhance it with EMDR, like bilateral stimulation techniques. Or I basically, with this client, I asked her to write a journal entry every day about something that she was grateful. So basically to slowly build resources and there are different other psychology books on how you can guide and help people to build resources. And then at some point after a couple sessions, I would try again the Immanuel approach and see where we go now. But with this client also what I saw here, not just neglect and trauma in early childhood, but also there was a huge spiritual block. Like there was a lot of demonic stuff going on. And I was able then to also refer her to, I love Monsignor Rossetti's podcast. I don't know if you know him, like the St. Michael Center for Spiritual Renewal. He does online deliverance sessions and such. And I asked her to watch him and pray with him online through these sessions. And yeah, so there can be spiritual blockages. There can be trauma blockages, neglect, isolation and such. Yeah.
And what I'm hearing you say there, Bernhard, is that and that's exactly what I would do. There's some times where neglect and trauma is so severe that you, with the client, build in some very basic natural things, or at least teach them how to see those basic and natural things. Like a client of mine, I recall, loved outside, just being outside. And I thought, perfect. I know the Holy Spirit loves outside too. So we'll just start there. And then it created this, it was safe. It was a place they could go. And then all of a sudden the Lord met them there in that spot of the safety of being outside. But it was like they couldn't link that in their brain. It was a dissociative place for so long. And there's many, many other practices and ways that we can do that. I just think it's helpful for people to know if they, go watch a podcast or listen to something on the manual and they try it for 3 minutes and go, this doesn't work, I'm going to quit. A lot of that has to do with, one, we have a human nature that needs to be honored, and there's a way that once you honor that way, you will actually see effect. But if you try to do it like you respond to social media and just swipe, that's not how human beings work, and so it might not be as effective, and it has nothing to do with the technique. It has to do with the approach and us trying to cram an ideology on top of something that doesn't work. So there are those dynamics too. So I want to start wrapping up. Bob, any final questions, thoughts that you have for Bernhard?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying. I have had people in the past say, aren't you trying to control the Lord when you do that kind of prayer? That's one of the criticism that's been there about prayer in general. And the reality is the opposite. But I think what you're describing, Jake, is important, and you're saying it too, Bernhard, which is you're using technique to facilitate encounter. You're not dictating encounter. We can't control encounter with the Lord. That's something he gives. But we can facilitate at a human level, understanding the things. This is where good therapy comes in, right? Understanding the things that are barriers and blocks to that encounter, and then facilitating an openness into that encounter by using that. But the encounter is always a surprise. The encounter is always his initiative. We're not imaging the Blessed Mother or imaging Jesus in the way that you would do it with visual imagery. You're allowing the Holy Spirit to reveal reality in those images, not constructing images.
Bernhard, it's been awesome having you on. I'm so glad that people have gotten to know you, Bernhard. There's whole other categories of things that I know personally, you and I've talked about them about that you're passionate about.
Oh, yeah.
I want you to just touch on it quickly, and maybe that'll set us up for another episode to maybe have you back on in the future. But I know you care deeply about safeguarding.
Yes.
So can you just tell us really a little bit, because it links really beautifully to a previous episode we just had with a guest, Teresa Green. So just comment briefly about that, because it's just awareness. I would love people to know about awareness. This is something else that you're passionate about. So tell us a little bit about that. Then I'm going to talk about your website and how people can get in contact with you.
Yeah, one of my main areas of coaching that I offer in counseling is narcissistic abuse recovery coaching, like through the whole grief to grace, like I ministered in these retreats, seeing so many people being abused, like domestically in their families, but also within the church. I read a study the other day by Dr. Lisa Oakley in 2018, and she did a study on basically spiritual abuse in the UK, England. And she, like the results of that study was that 75% of Christians have suffered some form of coercion, manipulation, or control, or abuse of power in their Christian communities. I think that the term spiritual abuse started in the 1990s. It's very young, kind of, to start researching about all these things, or narcissism, narcissistic abuse. That's all very young science and psychology, right? But I think spiritual coercion existed since, look at the Pharisees, right? That's basically emotional spiritual abuse, what they did with their people. And we see it a lot still today in our churches. And I think, and I'm a victim of that myself. What I shared a little bit earlier in my own monastery, what I experienced there was abuse of power by religious people, even using God to back them up, kind of like God is used in an instrument to coerce other people, and that's just not right. And unfortunately, that's a thing. There's not much awareness about these things in our communities. And I would love not to preach against priests or religious or bishops. That's not my intention. I actually want to help the church, right? I want to also help these priests and religious, because I think seminarians or young brothers or sisters, when they suffer religious coercion or abuse of power, we usually don't see them. I think that's a minority. We don't see their sufferings because we always believe, these people in the monasteries, they just have the best life, right? They're just with God and such. And it's so hard to acknowledge them. I love to spread more awareness because I have the deep desire to help them and to help the church recover from that amazing, crazy abuse crisis since the last 1-2 decades, right? The sexual abuse crisis is only the tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
Bernhard, I appreciate that. And I want to encourage listeners who this is something that they're passionate about, or something that maybe even they have experienced and they want to experience healing. This is obviously on your heart, Bernhard, as well. So listeners, if you want to connect with Bernhard, I want to give you his website. So it's threshmountains.com. So THRESHMOUNTAINS.com, threshmountains.com. So go and check that out. And you've got you can contact Bernhard. You can see various things that he's done. He even has a podcast of his own that he does. And so there's all kinds of stuff there where you can reach out and connect with him. Bernhard, it's just such a gift to know you. And I just want to affirm you as someone who is living a life worthy of the call. You know, we respond to a call in this life, and I admire and appreciate how you're responding to that and living a life of grace and doing your own work, but as well as serving others. And it's just really cool to see all the integration, all the stuff that you're doing. It's an incredible gift. And I hope people reach out to you because I know they'll be blessed by getting to know you and potentially even working with you, even maybe in an intensive. It was a really powerful and beautiful thing. So we're just so grateful that you joined us. So thanks for being with us. And listeners, we hope this episode blessed you, and we will talk to you again soon.